Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast with Benji Naesen. We're here with the UAE Tour Stage 3 recap, the first World Tour mountaintop finish for the season. We're brought to you by our show partner, Lecole. They produce performance cycling apparel. They've got some new ranges, new product lines that they've brought out as well. There's a Strava club with hundreds of thousands of people in it regularly. Has some pretty steep discounts attached to that if you do enough Ks whilst you're a member of the club, I understand. If you want to check them out, they're at www.lecole.cc if you want to check out any of that and the kit they have through the link in the description. But onto the UAE Tour Stage 3, the profile Benji was like Chalet Renard stage the other day, actually, the Mont Ventoux stage. It's from Alain to Jebel Hafeet. Jebel Hafeet has featured a number of times now. World Tour races, and it's pancake flat, 166k total, but then it's flat for the first 156k's of that, and then they do Jebel Hafeet, 10.6k's at 7% average gradient. First 2k's are an average of 7%. Then the third k is not so bad. Then the fourth k is 10%. That's the steepest part of the climb, and there's 8.5s, 8.5, and then the third to last K, only 4%. Second last K, only 5.5%. And then the last 600 meters is average of flat. It's basically flat, and then there's a little kick up to the finish. So it's a climb that the damage has to be done early if you want to make big time gaps. Going into the stage, Pogačar is leading the general classification. I think, how many seconds was he? 5 seconds ahead of João Almeida, 18 seconds ahead of Cataneo, and 33 ahead of Harper. And the big man for today, Adam Yates, who won this race overall last year and did well on her feet, he was 39 seconds behind Pogačar. So he had to do something today on the steeper of the two mountaintop finishes to make a difference. But how did the stage start and shape up, Benji? Was there any crosswind action, or could there have been?
Well, the wind was just not strong enough today. We saw that some teams tried to pull it off during the stage. I think it was Bora and Bahrain at a certain point tried pulling the front of the peloton, but nothing major popped up. We had two riders in the breakaway, as expected on these kind of stages. There's not a lot of people that are desiring to be in the breakaway for a long day, having a peloton control the pace, because that's kind of destined to happen on this kind of terrain with such a flat section before the climbing even starts at the end. And those two riders were Galopin and Thomas de Gent, so a pretty good duo for the breakaway, but it's just not really destined for the breakaway today. Now, all in all, that did kind of stay at a decent gap, 4 minutes certainly, 3 minutes and a half, something around there. Peloton was in control, and they basically just sped up towards the end of the stage because there was a certain tailwind at a certain point that helps speed up the peloton towards the end of the stage there. But obviously, the stage properly started the moment that the peloton reached Jebel Hafeet, which is that final climb you just introduced. About the final climb, the thing is, the breakaway had like 30 seconds left the moment the climb started. We saw that UAE was taking the front of the peloton. That was in a formation where we had Formolo as last man for Pogačar and Mike as second last man for Pogačar. I think Bjerg was in there as well, helping out Polanyi as third last man. And that was a formation of the UAE train that was controlling the peloton at the first parts of the climb. We quickly saw that a lot of riders started dropping. It was quite a surge at the start. And for example, Lutsenko, a rider that was named as one of the favorites for a bunch of preseason races, was just not there once again. And we've seen it multiple times already. He had COVID, I think, over the winter, and that probably did have an influence on his preparation for this season. So perhaps Definitely. It's all linked to that. I hope that he can get over it and he can figure out a way to get to a level again that is competable for race victories, because at the moment he's just not there. And yeah, a lot of people had him as an outsider today, but we mentioned it before. We didn't expect it after Chalet Renard, and he confirmed once again today he just looked pretty bad, honestly. He dropped with about 8.5k to go there. And
I wasn't surprised by that, Benji, because remember, Jana Seelt spoke to us, the Astana managing director, and she was like, well, when they have COVID, they have to take a long time off from serious training, and that would have even if he didn't have particularly bad symptoms, just that break from training just before the recommencement of racing would have affected his preparation. I want to mention one little note that did happen before the climb. There was an intermediate sprint. Galopin and De Gent had taken the first two placements, so there was only 1 second on offer, and only one rider that came third could get it. Quickstep moved up to take that second, Murku with Almeida on the wheel, and Pogačar sent Gaviria to sprint to the second, whilst Pogačar stayed in the bunch. It was very smart. And Gaviria dusted off Almeida and then had a wry smile at Murku as he went back into the bunch. So that was a very funny moment. But that UAE tempo, Benji, I don't think it was that hot, because I just think when they started the climb, people that weren't there on GC just stopped. Just were like, well, I'll just do it at my own pace. Because then the group stayed pretty much the same size for the next few kilometres. And then it was Ineos taking over, because I think UAE were doing what Ineos had done and Jumbo-Visma have done. They just ride sort of comfortable tempo because they're in the box seat. They only have to ride defensively and just take Pogačar all the way to the line. Ineos and Yates had to do something big today, and they were in the first 3Ks of the climb, all UAE on the front. I've just read that profile out to everybody. And it's the third or fourth K that's the steepest one before they get into a few Ks of 8.5%. So it was really about 3.5 Ks in, I think, that Ineos started to ramp up the pace. First with Brandon Rivera, and that started to drop quite a few people actually going off the back. Masnada gone, Froome gone, as well as others. Like most of the peloton was starting to get dropped. Sosa then pulled not very long at all, which was surprising to me, actually. This stage should suit him. It looks exactly the same as Charlie Renard stage he dominated a week and a half ago. So maybe just no good in the wind, maybe the long flat run, I don't know. But he wasn't particularly good for Yates today at all, actually, Sosa, and that's a real concern if you're Bernal for the Giro. Is he really going to be your last man? And we'll talk about that in a later podcast. But then it was Danny Martinez, who did quite a good job, actually. First time we've seen him really pulling in the mountains in Ineos colours. But then I didn't see what happened, Benji. I feel like it cut away and then it cut back. And what were we, 5Ks left on the climb? And really you got 3Ks to make an impression now if you're Yates. And it cut back to them, and it was a group of Buchmann, Kuss, Pogačar, Yates, who else? Florian Stork, Harm van Oka, Almeida was still there by the skin of his teeth. And what happened? It was just, I feel like we missed Martinez pulling off.
Yeah, it looked like he had a bit of a crazy tempo at the end of his pull, most likely. That probably didn't happen on camera for us, but it came back on the screen and we saw that there was no Ineos rider at the front anymore. And Yates was like, okay, I'm not going to take over yet. And it was a bit of who's going to react to that first? And obviously that's the opportunity for the riders that are not up there in GC to say, okay, so the domestiques for the GC riders are gone. This is my moment to try something, because if I attack and those GC riders are looking at each other, then I could potentially gain a good 30, 40 seconds and do what Yates did last year and win the stage. And that's exactly what Cor was thinking, because on the left side on the road, if you are looking at the screen, right side for him, he started with a small attack. But to my surprise, Yates was responding to that attack, and obviously that triggered Pogačar to respond to that attack. And they were there with 3 riders suddenly. Those were the 3 riders stronger than everybody in the field. And I don't know, I wanted to give that topic to you. Like, Yates responding to Kuss, was it necessary? Is it something that you think he should have done? I don't
really get it. I don't know, because instead of focusing on marking Pogačar and trying to set up an attack, he closed down Kuss not once but twice. 2 separate attacks. Kuss no threat on GC. Yates also behind on GC. He's having to attack Pogačar. He's got kilometers of running out while they're looking at each other. And yeah, he closed down Kuss twice. I didn't understand it. Maybe he was wanting the bonus seconds that Kuss might take if Kuss won the stage. That seems pretty far-fetched to me. I think that's the sort of thing you'd be worrying about if you've already dropped Pogačar and Kuss is going up the road. So yeah, I think that hindered Yates' ability to attack soon after the Martinez pull. I would have let Kuss go and just tried to attack Pogačar over a number of times. But because that worked last year, the attack, stop, eventually worked for Yates last year, and he dropped him. So I think today was not great tactically from him. I think eventually he did attack, or they basically dropped everybody else. He's got Pogačar absolutely glued to his wheel, Kuss in their group, and then I think Kuss eventually... No, this is what happened, Benji. Pogačar, after a small acceleration from Yates, Pogačar started to pull, which makes sense, right? You pull if you're feeling pretty good to just keep the pace reasonably high. For each moment that you're pulling and they're sitting on, the road to the line, the space to the finish is diminishing, and he's got to make up 40 seconds on you.
Yeah.
So that made sense.
Almeida was behind as well. And
Almeida was behind, who, is only 5 seconds behind Pogačar on GC. So, cross that 5 seconds, 8 seconds, intermediate sprint and crosswinds coming up, that could be an issue for Pogačar, but so he's going to put time into him as well. But then Benji, he flicked Yates, went behind Sepp Kuss, and then Yates attacked off the front of Kuss, who wasn't looking particularly good at that moment. And now Pogačar he was waiting for Kuss to close the gap. And now Pogačar had to close a 10 to 15 minute gap to Yates attacking. He put himself in a really bad spot there, I think, actually. And he has to, after he's pulled, go onto Yates' wheel and tell Kuss, hey, either attack or give me Yates' wheel right now. So do you think I'm making too big a deal about that, or do you think that sort of thing is actually a mistake that could have cost him, if GC was closer, or Yates was Roglic or someone super strong today?
Yeah, it's a small mistake. He expected Kuss to react to that, while Kuss is in no position to react to that. Kuss should not respond to that, perhaps for the stage, because Kuss obviously wanted the stage, but Kuss also at that point already looked like he wasn't going to take it all, because he was the weakest of the three at that point, because every time Yates attacked in that group, we saw that Pogačar was the easiest to respond, and Kuss had a bit of trouble taking that gap down. And like you mentioned, Kuss wasn't looking that great when Pogačar was going to sit in Kuss's wheel. Perhaps Pogačar expected more from Kuss, because obviously Kuss would also want the stage. But yeah, I think it's a small mistake, but it's nothing endearing. I think it's something that he'll realize afterwards, okay, I should not have done that. But yeah, I think Pogačar is a really clever rider nonetheless.
Yeah, it didn't really matter in the end. Yates, now with Pogačar on his wheel, is pretty much riding tempo. He's moving, then also putting time himself into Almeida, moving up from third to second on GC, depending on whatever the time gap eventually was. I think, that setting pace there did help him do that. And I think he eventually attacked Pogačar again, tried to accelerate with about 2 kilometers remaining, bearing in mind it gets much less steep after that. So the last steeper section of the genuine part of the climb, he tried to attack Pogačar. They're both in the big ring at this point. Pogačar, just like we've seen before, he just can accelerate and just sprint out of the saddle indefinitely, infinite sprint out of the saddle to get back to a wheel of Yates. Yates he's pretty strong, but I think Yates knew, Benji. He knew after the failed attack at 4Ks or so that it wasn't happening today, making up 40 seconds on Pogačar. So do you think Yates did the right thing, kind of riding it in at a decent pace, trying one last attack, but then kind of accepting his fate?
Yeah, I think at a certain point, I think he saw it mainly in the last 2 kilometers, where he started riding a proper tempo, where Pogačar was still not having the best time in his wheel, but it also wasn't real trouble for Pogačar at that point. And I think at that point, Yates knew that, it's a bit over to try and drop Pogačar here, but if I set up a decent tempo, I might still be able to figure out how to win the stage. And in the last kilometer and a half, I think he switched towards trying to win the stage from the initial thought of trying to drop Pogačar. And I think he made a bit of a mistake there, because, well, in the last kilometer, they ride into the last kilometer with Yates in first, and Pogačar in second. You mentioned when you did the review of the parkour that the last kilometer evens out, and in the last 500 meters we even go down a tiny bit before we ramp up towards the finish line. And just before the line, there's this very shady corner, like 20 meters before the line, 90 degrees left corner. And,
180. It's even more than 90. They go back on themselves twice. Yeah. I was watching from another angle. It seems to be more than just a 90-degree turn. It's like a left-hand bend and then the 90-degree turn. So if everyone wants to remember the Lutsenko-Pogačar finish last year, where Lutsenko went through this corner first and then opened up the space on the barrier on his right-hand side. So they come into the corner pretty hot, and you got to be first through this corner and then shut off your gate on the right-hand side. And then it's literally like 30 meters, 40 meters to the line. So as everyone's accelerating out of that corner, it's very hard to get past people if you've actually closed the door properly on your right-hand side. So you think Pogačar, he's obviously familiar with it, Benji, and it's his home race. I'm surprised Yates wouldn't have been familiar with it either, Benji. But yeah, we all noticed Pogačar was laying off Yates' wheel from like 200 out and then accelerated really early, kind of like, was it Simon Yates, Benji, against Mühlberger and Bilbao at the Tour de France when he got that stage win, where he sprinted for the left-hand corner just before the finish line and then accelerated out of it. Same thing here. Pogačar gets the jump on Yates, who tries to jump on his wheel. Pogačar then takes the corners really, really hot and then is able to kick one last time out of the last corner and shutting the door on his right properly. And there's really nothing Yates could do, Benji. He kind of got mugged. Joe at ITV messaged me being like, Pogačar's mugged Yates there. Do you reckon that's actually a fair assessment? I reckon it is.
I agree. I think that was a mistake that Yates perhaps did. Obviously, it's not an ideal position to be in first before the corner even happens, because then people can pass you to get fast into the corner. And that moment that you spoke about, the moment that Pogačar went from being on a bit of a gap to passing Yates, was the perfect moment to get past Yates. And I don't know, I felt like Yates reacted a tiny bit late there. I think that was like the moment where you can expect that to happen. Obviously, it's easier said than done, but I don't know. It's a bit difficult. Like, is the reason that they open up a gap that when looking back, it's hard to see them coming, or what is the logic behind it?
So if you're checking over your shoulder at maybe every 2 seconds, then when you look behind, you'll see that the rider is behind you, laying off. And when you look, maybe then check again, look behind again, you'll see that they're still behind you, but maybe they've just moved up onto your wheel, but they've actually accelerated hard to close that space. So they come actually, when you then turn back and face the front, if you time it ideally, Kwiatkowski does this magically, has done in the past. If you time it right, as they look back to the front, you're now going past their back wheel because you've been accelerating. Now, I don't actually think that happened that perfectly here. I think Yates did kind of see him coming. Pogačar's initial kick was really strong. But yeah, the laying off is so that they can actually be going past them with enough acceleration that there's a gap to the wheel, which there was. Yates got no draft trying to get back to Pogačar's wheel initially. He's had to sprint hard. Now you've got these series of corners you're straight into. You're having to handle, like, you're focused on your handling a lot because they're quite sharp actually to the left. And then you got to try a re-kick to come round a bike length and a half out of the last corner and come over him in 40 meters. It's not going to happen. So really good from Pogačar. Obviously knew the finish really, really well, which is unsurprising. He seems to know finishes well, Pogačar.
Yeah.
He seems to know parkour well, study the route. Not sure if it's him. Probably is, and his team and staff. Same Planche de Belfi, etc. And it was kind of like that stage, Benji, where Port kicked early, trying to drop Lopez in the Tour. Roglic also kicked early behind Kuss, I think, and then Pogačar came around them and beat them. And it was like a longer sprint from Pogačar today, at least 150, 200. That's what this reminded me of, and he's in great form, Benji. Everyone should be pretty terrified. I think this is the clear Tour de France. He's the clear Tour de France favourite for me. And one big, I'll try to read out. I should probably make more note of the second group on the road. Almeida was riding his TT tempo, which he did in the Giro. He sort of rides his own pace, conserves his losses. Very smart, did well. Han van Hooke, who I mentioned yesterday, did well. But this is the standings. Higuita third, Pogačar first, Yates second, same time. Higuita third, winning the bunch sprint from the second group. Bookman fourth, quite nice from Bookman actually. Good to see him doing well. Han van Hooke fifth, Almeida sixth. They're at 48 seconds behind Pogačar and Yates. Florian Stork, Benji, seventh.
Crazy.
Nelson Powell the same time. Stork, didn't we were like, is he the lead out guy for Case
No, I was like, I have no clue what this guy can do. And he just came like top 10 on Jabal Hafeet. I'm super impressed. The guy's 23,
obviously can
97,
climb.
best year. And he can clearly climb. What a talent, man. Like, I expect more from him now.
Chris Harper 9th, the Australian. Geoffrey Bouchard 10th for Ajoudua Citroën. Kuss, after unsuccessfully trying to attack to go for the stage win, dropped back to pace Harper. So I actually think that would have helped a fair bit. Current GC standings, Pogačar first, Yates losing another 4 seconds in bonus seconds to him, 43 seconds back. Almeida drops down to third, 1 minute and 3 behind Pogačar and 20 seconds behind Yates. Harper stays in fourth. Cataneo loses a lot of time. I think he lost a couple of minutes. I think Cataneo must have beaten Masnada. Masnada got dropped early today, Benji. I was actually I was surprised by that, actually. Maybe Cataneo is climbing better than I expected. Masnada he didn't climb as well as I expected. One thing I want to talk about, though, Benji, I just mentioned... I'll do the stage 4 preview for tomorrow. 204 Ks, Almajan Island to Almajan Island, 2 intermediate sprints, and it's pancake flat. There might be wind, but I don't have the weather tracker up. That's all. That's all the preview I have. So it's going to be a bunch sprint unless there's wind, in which case Quickstep need to create echelons to try and drop Pogačar, because Almeida ain't making that time up on stage 5 on Jebel Jais, and maybe Ineos can try the same thing with Yates. But sorry, Benji, the question I had: were you surprised / concerned by UAE's guys in the mountains helping or not being able to help Pogačar too much? Formolo dropping early. Is Micah here?
Micah's here.
Yeah, Micah did nothing for him. Didn't matter in the end, just like in the Tour. But is that a source of concern for you, or just something to watch for future races?
Well, they started early with the pacing on the climb. Like you said, it wasn't the biggest tempo by UAE. I think we saw Polanj do a really good job at setting that pace. Then they switched to Micah, and he was quickly gone the second that Brandon Rivera started pacing Ineos next to the UAE train. So we had a moment where there were 2 trains next to each other. Once Rivera was pacing there, Micah was getting in trouble, and Micah started dropping. And the second that Sosa and then eventually Martinez started coming to the front, I think when Sosa even started coming to the front already, then Formula was already behind Pogačar, like 3 positions, 4 positions, looking really bad. And it's not great. It's not great if the comparison between the trains is so significant. But I also think that UAE doesn't necessarily need to ride the same way as Ineos is doing to present Pogačar with a stage win. They just need to be there on certain stages. The problem is if they obviously have an Ineos train that's pacing like today, then they won't be there in the last 5 kilometers, it seems, because they were gone the second that Martinez hit the front. And that's not ideal if you want to have support for your leader here. He was basically isolated, Pogačar, from 5.1 to 5.6 kilometers to go.
I think in a world where he's on the same time as Yates on GC and Pogačar has teammate help as strong as Ineos, then he could have attacked to gain time on Yates. But that's not how the stage played out. I think Pogačar, I don't know, Yates and Pogačar today, Yates might have even been marginally stronger, but even if it's only 2% stronger, that's not enough, because Pogačar is pretty smart, getting on his wheel early.
Yeah, there's also the factor that this is still a 1-week race. Adam Yates is better at 1-week race than 3-week races. So for a Grand Tour, we're only seeing Pogačar's form really here, because even if Adam Yates would have won today with 40 seconds, I wouldn't have written him down as a GC favorite for a Grand Tour personally.
No. I mean, he did the same last year. It's going to be interesting for Ineos going into the Tour. Yates is looking pretty good, but I think Yates has performed as expected at UAE Tour here. He's done it before, done pretty well. I haven't looked at how quick they did the climb at or the numbers or anything like that. And that's exactly right, Benji. Pogačar in the third week of a Grand Tour could probably do the same level as today, or just below, whilst everyone is tired and buckled. We've seen that in Vuelta 2019, Tour de France 2020, and that's why he is so good. So, yeah, pretty interesting stage. Didn't completely blow up. No real... I mean, to be honest, Benji, it played out exactly as we expected. Suicide breakaway, UAE false tempo, Ineos trying to launch Yates. Yates kind of didn't launch and couldn't drop Pogačar, and Pogačar sprint around for the stage which exactly as it was drawn up. But it's been a really exciting UAE tour so far. Tomorrow, it looks like a sprint stage, but yes?
Yeah, tomorrow looks like sprint stage, but I do think this kind of specifies my view on the stage after that. I think we're going to talk into that tomorrow, but the likes of Hafeet getting third here, that means that he can follow the climbers up Chais and can probably outsprint quite a few of them at the end. So I think this only strengthens my view on Higuita for Jebel Yais personally.
True, yeah, that's a good shout. And I wish they'd put Jebel Yais today and Jebel Hafeet on stage 5, as we mentioned before. Well, that's all from us. We'll see you tomorrow. Ciao.